It's Mickadee TV. And this is my Minnesota Vikings 2018 season, week number 9, game number 9, recap and review of the Minnesota Vikings game against the Detroit Lions at US Bank Stadium. And as we know, the Minnesota Vikings won this game by a score of 24-9. If you look at the score, it's a little misleading. You'd think that the Vikings kicked ass throughout this whole game, but in fact, the first half they kind of had the game in control, but in the second half, their offense really sucked big time in the second half, and I'll try to analyze what happened in this game, but it's kind of interesting. But the big star of the game that I'm going to have to say in this game was the Minnesota Vikings defense. The Minnesota Vikings defense was the big star of the game, and I'll talk more about their stats as well into the game later on. But with the offensive side of the ball, we scored 17 points in the first half, 0 in the second half. That's unacceptable, especially against a team like the Detroit Lions. We should have at least scored 2 more touchdowns in the second half on the offense, and that didn't happen, and it's quite disappointing to see. So let's start off with the stats here. Kirk Cousins was 18 of 22, 164 yards passing. That's not that much yards passing, which is kind of concerning in that regard. I'm sure he's going to have some good days and some bad days, but compared to the week before where I think he threw over 300 yards passing the week before in a loss to the Saints, this time around he only had 164 yards passing, 1 TD. The 2 big mistakes he made in the game was his 1 interception, which was a horrible interception. It just looked like it basically went into the guy's hands. And 1 fumble loss, which is unacceptable as well. I can handle, maybe 1 turnover every 4 games for a quarterback, but to have 2 turnovers in a game by the quarterback, you need a top quarterback that cannot do that in the game. You cannot give up 2 turnovers in a ball game, and that's what happened with Kirk Cousins. You need to be a better quarterback than this. In order to be a great quarterback, you can't let this kind of stuff happen. So Kirk Cousins' game was off again. I don't know what the coaching staff is doing with him or what, but it's a little concerning what's going on with Kirk Cousins. Dalvin Cook came back into the game. I think he played last week, but this time he had a better and more active role in the game. Although he only had 10 carries, he did have 89 yards and 2 catches for 20 yards for total yardage of 109 yards. That's what I want to see from our running backs, is them being more involved with both the running game and the receiving game. And just to see that receiving yardage be up a little bit more, and maybe catches as well. Latavius Murray had 10 carries for 31 yards and 1 TD. Now that 1 TD was kind of interesting because it looked like he made a fumble at the goal line when he was trying to stretch out the ball. And then when it was fumbled, Rudolph recovered it in the end zone for a apparent touchdown. But that wasn't the case on the because every TD gets reviewed on the screen or by the officials in the desk, and it did look like when Latavius Murray stretched out, the ball did break the pane before he lost control of it. So technically, not a fumble, so that's good enough for me because he stretched it, got the touchdown. That's all he needed. So no concern there. So it was good to see. Adam Thielen had only 4 receptions for only 22 yards with a TD catch. And that ended his streak of 100-yard receiving games catches as a wide receiver. I think he broke some record or maybe tied it, but it was 8 games in a row this season. He had over 100 yards or more in a game in receiving. So that's an amazing feat. And I think, for a lot of fans, especially me, when you play fantasy football and that, you think your star wide receiver is going to score 100 or going to get you 100 yards receiving every game. It's amazing how that doesn't happen as much. It's very rare to see wide receivers get 100 yards consistently every game. And what Adam Thielen did was just absolutely amazing. You really don't see that happen that much, and it was great to see it. I didn't want to talk about it during the stretch. I didn't want to jinx them, but when it ended, and it ended on a huge goose egg from Kirk Cousins. If it wasn't for the turnovers, there could have been a possibility that Adam Thielen might have had a few more opportunities to extend that streak, but it didn't happen. And as you know, all good things come to an end. So, otherwise, our leading wide receiver was Laquan Treadwell, and it was only 37 yards receiving. He had 2 catches. So that kind of tells you what was going on with the receiving game. And the passing game, it wasn't quite there. Offensive line-wise, offensive line, based on the stats, they had a hell of a game. This was probably their best game of the season so far. They only gave up 1 sack, only gave up 3 tackles for losses, 2 passes defended, and a QB hit. So the offensive line did great, I think. But we only managed 17 points on offense in this game. And in the second half, it was zilcho. And I would have to say the blame is partly towards Kirk Cousins with his turnovers, and the other blame is on Mike Zimmer for his conservative coaching calls on offense in the second half. Defensive side of the ball, the big stars of the game. Daniel Hunter had 9 tackles, 6 solo, 3.5 sacks, 3.5 tackles for losses, 4 QB hits, and a goofy, stupid fumble by Stafford or whoever was responsible for it. Daniel Hunter recovered that fumble and brought it in for a touchdown. And that was great to see and put the final nail in the coffin to the Lions. But great effort by the defense to just rattle Matthew Stafford. Eric Kendricks had 9 tackles, 6 solo. Harrison Smith, number 22, had 7 tackles, 5 solo. Eric Wilson, number 50, had 6 tackles, 5 solo. Tom Johnson had 5 tackles, 4 solo, 2.5 sacks, 3.5 tackles for losses, 4 QB hits. Everson Griffin had 4 tackles, 3 solo, 1.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for losses, and 3 QB hits. Amazing play. And like I said, the defense was the star of the game. The defense set a record at US Bank Stadium, or in all the games the Vikings have ever played. They set an all-time sacks record in one game at 10 sacks. They had 10 sacks in this game. Absolutely amazing. They put a lot of pressure on Matthew Stafford, which was awesome to see. And the defense had 12 tackles for losses, 17 QB hits. Amazing. And they scored that 1 TD off of that fumble recovery. So the defense was a huge star of the game. Special teams, Dan Bailey, number 5, was 1 of 5 on field goals and 3 of 3 on extra points. Very quiet game from him, which is good. If you get a quiet game from your kicker, that means no mistakes were made. So it was great to see that Dan Bailey did his job and nothing else had to be worried about. So now I get to the big juicy part of this section. Mike Zimmer. Once again, I don't know what the heck this coach is thinking in the second half. I don't know what he's thinking when he's. Well, I know what he's thinking. And I've said this before over and over again. This guy plays not to lose. He doesn't play to win. He plays not to lose, and that's what he did in the second half of the game. He called a lot of conservative plays. So I would say 50% of that is on him. The other 50% is on Kirk Cousins giving up so many 2 turnovers. Excuse me there. Let me take a drink here before I end this. But once again, Mike Zimmer. I don't know what he's going to do during the bye week coming up, but hopefully he'll get things straightened out. I'm hoping to have a mid-season review or bye week review of so far what's happened in the season with the Vikings and in the NFL. And I hope to talk to you guys soon then, and I look forward to talking about it. Skol Vikings!